The morning sky over London was filled with heavy grey clouds. Soft raindrops began to fall, tapping quietly on umbrellas and raincoats as people gathered outside Buckingham Palace. The air was cool and damp, and everyone hoped the rain wouldn't ruin the special moment they had come to see, the changing of the guard. Families, tourists, and locals stood behind the black and gold palace gates. Many of them held up phones and cameras, trying to capture the grand sight. Among the crowd were children, some sitting on their parents' shoulders, their eyes wide with excitement. The royal family was expected to attend, and there were quiet whispers that Princess Charlotte might be there too. Suddenly, a sleek black car pulled up near the palace entrance. The crowd leaned forward, curious. The door opened, and out stepped Prince William, followed by Princess Kate. Then came Princess Charlotte, holding her father's hand. She wore a neat blue coat and small rain boots that splashed lightly in the puddles as she walked. Her hair was neatly tied back, and her bright eyes looked around with wonder. The crowd smiled and pointed softly, being careful not to shout. Charlotte waved shyly at a few children near the front, and they waved back, excited to see someone so special and close to their age. The royal family moved toward the viewing area where they could watch the guard change, a tradition full of music, marching, and precision. Charlotte was excited but also curious. While her parents focused on the ceremony, she began looking around. The rain had gotten a little stronger now, and many people had opened umbrellas, but not the royal guards. They stood still, straight and proud in their bright red uniforms and tall black hats. They did not move, even as water dripped from their coats. Charlotte's eyes focused on one guard in particular. He stood nearest to their viewing spot. Rain slid down his uniform, but he didn't blink or shift his feet. Charlotte watched him closely, her young mind trying to understand why he didn't try to stay dry. She gave a little tug on her father's hand. Prince William looked down at her and smiled, thinking she might have a question about the guards or the ceremony. But she didn't speak right away. Instead, she looked back at the guard again, her brows slightly furrowed, her expression thoughtful. The ceremony had only just begun, but something had already caught Charlotte's heart. She wasn't thinking about the music or the marching. She was thinking about that silent, soaked guard, and what, if anything, she could do. As the raindrops continued to fall gently around them, a quiet but meaningful moment was beginning to form. It was a moment no one saw coming, not even the guard himself. Princess Charlotte stood quietly next to her father as the ceremony continued. The band began to play a traditional tune, and the guards marched in perfect lines. Their shiny black boots splashed slightly on the wet ground, but their steps were strong and even. Many in the crowd watched in amazement, but Charlotte's eyes stayed on one guard, the one who stood closest to her. He didn't move at all. The rain kept falling, soaking his uniform and hat. Drops of water ran down his arms and onto his gloves. Still, he stood tall, just like he had been trained. He didn't speak, blink, or look at anyone. To him, standing still was part of his duty. But to Charlotte, he looked cold and alone. She leaned slightly toward her father again, her small hand tugging at his sleeve. Prince William leaned down and asked gently, "What is it, Charlotte?" She pointed softly at the guard. "He's getting wet," she said, her voice quiet and full of concern. William looked at the guard, then back at his daughter. He smiled kindly, touched by her thoughtfulness, but said nothing. Sometimes, royal children notice things adults didn't. Charlotte reached into her small purse. It was a gift she had received a few days ago. A tiny, colorful umbrella made just her size. It had flowers printed on it and folded neatly to fit inside her bag. She held it up and looked at her father again. "Can I give this to him?" she asked, her voice hopeful. Prince William blinked in surprise. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Royal rules were usually strict, especially during formal events. People weren't supposed to speak to the guards, and the guards were not allowed to respond. But he also saw the honesty in his daughter's eyes. She wasn't trying to make a scene. She simply wanted to help. He nodded slowly. "You can try," he said softly, "but be careful and stay close." Charlotte's face lit up with quiet determination. She stepped forward, staying just behind the low barrier where guests were allowed. A nearby palisade noticed her moving and took a step forward, but Prince William gently raised his hand. He wanted to let the moment happen. The rain fell steadily now, making soft sounds on the stone path. The guard remained still, unaware that a little girl in a blue coat was standing just a few feet away, holding up a tiny umbrella. Charlotte stretched her arm forward, lifting the umbrella as high as she could, just enough so the edge might offer a bit of shelter to the guard's soaked glove. The crowd behind the gates began to murmur softly. Some people pointed, others whispered. Cameras were raised again, but no one made a sound louder than the rain. Something unexpected was beginning to unfold. A small act of kindness, noticed by everyone, yet led by one thoughtful young girl. Princess Charlotte stood very still, holding the tiny umbrella in her hand, her eyes focused on the guard before her. The rain was coming down harder now, and the drops ran down the guard's red coat, his tall black hat wet with water. Charlotte knew she couldn't move too close, but she wanted to offer her umbrella. She held it just above her head, stretching her arm out toward him. The guard stood perfectly still, as he was trained to do. He didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge the small girl who was trying to help him. His face remained stern, as it should be, but there was something soft in his eyes, something that seemed to acknowledge the kindness of Charlotte's gesture. The people in the crowd began to notice what was happening. Whispers started to travel from person to person. A few cameras clicked, trying to capture the moment. But despite the cameras and the murmurs, the scene felt calm. The rain created a soft sound, like a quiet song in the background. The moment was special, simple, and full of quiet warmth. Charlotte didn't say a word. She didn't ask for attention or praise. She just stood there, waiting. The tiny umbrella shook slightly in her hand as the rain picked up again, but she didn't move. Her small body remained steady, a tiny figure standing out in the sea of onlookers. And then, something unexpected happened. The guard, who had stood still for so long, took a small, almost imperceptible step forward. It was only a slight movement, but it made a world of difference. He had noticed Charlotte's gesture. With great care, he shifted just enough so that his gloved hand was close enough to the edge of the umbrella. Charlotte's face brightened for a moment, her small smile almost hidden by the rain. She had been trying to offer the umbrella, but she hadn't expected this. It was a small but meaningful connection. The guard didn't speak, but in that brief moment, it felt as though he was accepting her kind offer. Prince William, who had been watching his daughter from a few steps behind, felt a swell of pride in his chest. He didn't step in, didn't interfere, but his heart warmed at seeing how his daughter had brought such a simple act of kindness to life. Even in such a formal setting, even in the rain, Charlotte had found a way to make a difference. It wasn't about grand gestures or attention. It was about showing care for someone who needed it. The crowd, too, seemed to pause for a moment. There was no applause, no loud cheers, just the soft sound of the rain and the quiet awe of those who had witnessed the small but powerful exchange. Some people smiled, some just stood in silence, taking in the peacefulness of the moment. Charlotte slowly pulled the umbrella back, as the guard remained at his post, still standing tall. Her eyes stayed on him for a moment longer, as if to make sure he was all right. Then she turned back to her family, her heart content. It was a moment that would be remembered, not for the grand ceremony or the royal titles, but for the simple, quiet kindness that had passed between a little girl and a royal guard. After the brief moment with the guard, Princess Charlotte stepped back, her eyes still focused on the soldier standing stoically in the rain. She turned slowly, her small umbrella tucked safely back inside her bag. Her heart was light, and a soft smile crossed her face, though it was subtle and gentle, like the rain itself. Prince William watched his daughter closely. He had been proud of Charlotte before, but today he felt something deeper. She hadn't just noticed the guard's discomfort, she had done something about it. It wasn't a grand gesture, but in that simple act, she had shown kindness in a way that many might overlook. It was a lesson, not only for her, but for everyone who had witnessed it. As Charlotte moved back to her family, the royal guard remained in his place, his tall black hat now dripping with rain. He didn't move or speak, his expression unchanged, but his eyes, for just a moment, had softened. He had acknowledged the gesture, and in doing so, something quiet yet meaningful had passed between him and the young princess. The crowd, though still silent, had sensed the shift. Some onlookers whispered to one another, amazed by what had just happened. It was a moment that seemed to break the usual pattern of the ceremonial event. The changing of the guard was always impressive, filled with discipline and order. But today, something different had happened, something human. A woman nearby, holding her young daughter's hand, bent down to whisper, "Did you see that? The princess was so kind to him," she said softly, her voice filled with warmth. Her daughter nodded, wide-eyed, looking over at Charlotte, who was now standing beside Prince William, her small hand tucked safely in his. The Princess of Wales, Kate, smiled gently as she watched her daughter return to the family. She knew that Charlotte had a good heart, but seeing it in action, seeing the way she had cared about something so small and yet so meaningful, made Kate's heart swell with pride. She reached out and gave Charlotte a light, reassuring pat on the head, and Charlotte beamed back at her. The ceremony carried on as usual, the guards continuing their march, and the band playing the familiar tunes. But for those who had witnessed the small exchange between the little princess and the royal guard, the day felt different. It wasn't just about the grand tradition. It was about kindness and how even the smallest actions could make a difference. As the ceremony came to an end, Charlotte stood quietly with her family, watching the final moments of the event. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle now, and the sky seemed to clear just a little. The guard, though still wet, stood tall, his face as serious as ever. But there was something in the air that hadn't been there before. A quiet appreciation, a gentle reminder that no matter how grand the occasion, kindness could always be the most powerful thing. With the ceremony over, the royal family turned to leave, but not before Charlotte glanced back once more at the guard. She smiled softly, knowing that sometimes the smallest gestures truly do make the biggest impact. As the royal family began to make their way toward the car, the crowd slowly started to disperse. The tourists and locals, who had gathered to watch the ceremony, were still talking quietly among themselves. Some of them were discussing the precision of the guards, others were marveling at how the royal family had arrived despite the rain. But there was one topic on everyone's mind, the moment between Princess Charlotte and the royal guard. Many of the onlookers had seen the small but powerful act of kindness. Some had even managed to capture it on camera, though no one could fully convey the warmth that had filled the air at that moment. It was the kind of moment that stayed with you long after it had passed, a gentle reminder that even in the most formal of settings, simple acts of kindness could shine through. Charlotte, walking beside her father, glanced up at him with a quiet question in her eyes. "Do you think he was okay, Daddy?" she asked softly, her small voice carrying just a hint of concern. Prince William looked down at his daughter, his heart full of pride. He smiled and nodded. "I think he's fine, Charlotte. He's a very strong man, and he's doing his job, but it was very kind of you to think of him," he said gently. Charlotte smiled, but it was a thoughtful smile. She hadn't done it for attention, and she wasn't expecting anything in return. She just wanted to make sure the guard wasn't too uncomfortable standing out in the rain. She had noticed, and that was enough for her. As they reached the car, Prince William opened the door for his family, helping Charlotte inside first. Kate, standing next to him, smiled at her daughter. "You did something very special today," she said softly, brushing a stray strand of hair away from Charlotte's face. "You showed kindness to someone who needed it, and that's something to be proud of." Charlotte looked up at her mother, her eyes bright with a mix of happiness and shyness. She hadn't expected to be praised, but her mother's words made her feel warm inside. She nodded quietly and then turned her attention back to the window as the car began to move. As they drove away from the palace, the rain had started to fade, leaving behind the faintest hint of sunshine peeking through the clouds. It was as if the weather itself had decided to reflect the mood of the day. The world outside seemed brighter, softer somehow, even though it had been a rainy morning. Back at the palace, the royal guard stood in his position, still as ever. He didn't move or show any sign that he had noticed anything different. To him, the ceremony had gone on just as it always did. But for those who had witnessed it, the memory of Charlotte's quiet kindness would remain. The small gesture, so simple yet so genuine, had created a moment that would be remembered by everyone who saw it. It wasn't about being in the spotlight or following the rules of tradition. It was about seeing someone in need and offering help in the gentlest way possible. For Charlotte, it was just another day in the life of a young royal. But for those who had witnessed it, it was a lesson in the power of kindness, and how even the smallest of actions could have a lasting impact. As the royal family's car drove through the busy streets of London, Princess Charlotte sat quietly by the window, watching the city go by. The rain had stopped, and the sun was beginning to peek through the clouds, casting a soft light over the city. Charlotte's thoughts, however, were far from the hustle and bustle of London life. Her mind kept drifting back to the guard standing in the rain. She wondered if he had felt better after she had offered him the umbrella. Prince William, noticing the thoughtful look on his daughter's face, glanced at her from the driver's seat. "What's on your mind, Charlotte?" he asked gently, his voice warm. Charlotte looked up at her father, her big brown eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Do you think he was cold?" she asked softly. "He looked so wet, Daddy. I just wanted to help him." William smiled, his heart swelling with pride at his daughter's caring nature. "I'm sure he was cold," he said, nodding. "But he's a strong man. That's part of his job, standing out there no matter the weather. But you were very kind to think of him. That's what matters the most." Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. She understood that the guard's job was to stand still, no matter what the weather was like, but she also knew how it felt to be cold and uncomfortable, and she just wanted to make sure he didn't feel too bad. It wasn't about doing something for attention or expecting thanks. It was just about making someone else feel a little better. Kate, sitting next to Charlotte, reached over and gave her a gentle pat on the back. "You did a very kind thing today, Charlotte," she said softly. "It wasn't about grand gestures, but about showing care for someone who needed it. That's what makes you special." Charlotte smiled shyly at her mother, her face lighting up with happiness. She didn't say anything, but the glow in her eyes was all the answer Kate needed. She had raised a daughter who understood the importance of kindness, even in small moments. The car continued through the streets, and soon they were back at their residence, a quiet and peaceful place away from the crowds. But the memory of that day would stay with Charlotte. It wasn't just a moment in time. It was a lesson that she would carry with her, something simple yet powerful that would shape the way she saw the world. The next day, as Charlotte went about her usual activities, she couldn't help but think back to the royal guard. She imagined him standing tall, his uniform still wet, but feeling just a little warmer because of her small act of kindness. The thought made her smile. For Charlotte, it was just another lesson in the importance of showing care for others. Sometimes it wasn't the big gestures that mattered most. It was the little things, the quiet moments of thoughtfulness, that could make a real difference in someone's day. It had been a rainy morning, but by the end of it, something brighter had emerged, not from the sun, but from the warmth of a simple, heartfelt gesture. The days that followed the ceremony were filled with the usual bustle of royal life. Princess Charlotte went to school, spent time with her family, and continued to learn the many lessons that came with being part of the royal family. But there was something different about her now. The quiet moment in the rain had left an impression on her, one that she couldn't shake. It wasn't about the ceremony, the guards, or even the attention she had received. It was about the simple kindness she had shown to someone in need. As she sat at the dinner table one evening, Charlotte couldn't help but bring up the guard once more. Her parents, Prince William and Kate, listened carefully as she spoke. "Do you think he was okay after the ceremony?" Charlotte asked, her voice soft. "I hope he wasn't too cold. I've been thinking about him." Kate smiled gently, her heart full of warmth. "I'm sure he was fine, sweetheart. Guards are trained to stand still and stay focused, no matter what the weather is like. But you did something kind, something that not everyone would have thought of. You should be proud of that." Prince William nodded in agreement. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness make the biggest difference. You might not have heard anything from the guard, but you still made him feel seen. That's what counts. Charlotte smiled, comforted by her parents' words. She had always known that kindness was important, but now she understood how it could make someone's day a little brighter, even in the most unexpected ways. The next week, the family attended another royal event, this time under the clear skies of spring. There was no rain this time, no need for umbrellas, but Charlotte couldn't help but remember what had happened at the palace. She found herself looking at the guards a little differently now, noticing the small things she hadn't seen before, how they stood tall, how they remained focused, how they took their jobs so seriously. As she watched them during the ceremony, Charlotte's thoughts drifted back to the guard she had helped. She wondered if he remembered that moment as much as she did. She wondered if, in his quiet way, he appreciated her small act of kindness. When the event ended and the family was preparing to leave, Charlotte caught sight of a familiar face among the guards. It was the same guard from the changing of the guard ceremony. He was standing with the others, looking just as focused as he had before, his tall hat sitting proudly on his head. Charlotte hesitated for a moment. Should she go over and say something? Should she do something else kind for him? Her heart was full of thoughts, but she decided to stay where she was, respecting his space as she had before. She didn't need to speak to him again. The memory of their brief moment in the rain was enough. As the family made their way to the car, Charlotte's mind was peaceful. She had done something kind when it mattered most, and that feeling stayed with her. It wasn't about being recognized or praised. It was about the simple power of making someone's day just a little bit better. The world might have continued on as usual, but for Charlotte, that rainy morning and the small kindness she shared had made everything feel a little warmer. Time passed, and the days grew warmer as spring settled in. Princess Charlotte continued with her schooling, spending time with her family, and enjoying the simple pleasures of her young life. Although the royal duties and events kept her busy, she often found herself reflecting on the small but meaningful moment she had shared with the royal guard in the rain. One afternoon, while Charlotte was sitting in the garden, she found herself thinking about how her simple act of kindness had affected her. She had offered the guard an umbrella without expecting anything in return, and yet it had stayed with her like a quiet, comforting thought. She had learned that kindness didn't need to be loud or grand to matter. Sometimes it was the smallest gestures that made the biggest impact. As Charlotte played with her younger brother, Prince Louis, she shared her thoughts with him, though he didn't fully understand the significance of what she was saying. He was just a toddler, chasing after butterflies and giggling as they fluttered by. But Charlotte was patient with him, showing him the small flowers she had picked from the garden and explaining how they, too, were part of the kindness she had been thinking about. Her mother, Kate, watched them from the doorway, a soft smile on her face. She could see that Charlotte was maturing in a way that was both thoughtful and kind. She had always known that her daughter had a big heart, but now Charlotte was starting to understand the deeper meaning behind her actions. Kate felt a great sense of pride in knowing that her daughter had learned such an important lesson. The guard from the ceremony, though never spoken of again, was always in the back of Charlotte's mind. She had never seen him again, but she had come to realize that it didn't matter. The true value of kindness was in the giving, not in whether or not it was acknowledged. That was a lesson Charlotte would carry with her as she grew older. One day, as Charlotte was walking with her father, Prince William, they passed a group of guards standing at attention near the palace gates. The guards were all still and focused, just as they had been during the ceremony. Charlotte stopped for a moment and looked at them, her gaze soft but steady. She remembered that day in the rain, how she had been able to offer just a small amount of help. She didn't know if it had made a difference to the guard, but she knew it had made a difference to her. Prince William, noticing where Charlotte's eyes were focused, bent down slightly to her level. "Do you remember the guard, Charlotte?" he asked. Charlotte nodded, a quiet smile on her face. "I think he was okay, but even if he wasn't, I did my best to help." Prince William smiled warmly, proud of his daughter's wisdom. "That's right. Kindness is about doing what you can, no matter how small the gesture. You made a difference, Charlotte. Never forget that." As they walked on, Charlotte felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had learned something valuable, something that would stay with her always. The simple act of offering an umbrella had taught her the power of kindness, a lesson that would last a lifetime. The world might move quickly, and there would always be new challenges, but she knew now that even in the most unexpected moments, small acts of kindness could change everything. With that thought, Charlotte smiled to herself, knowing that the lessons of the rainy day would continue to guide her for years to come.